at the end. So welcome aboard for those of you who are new to this process. My name is Chris Arski. I'm one of the curriculum coordinators for CARC Consortia, which is Central Alberta. And I work with an absolutely fantastic and ingenious, inventive mind, Ted, who's going to introduce himself as well.
Hi, everyone. Well, I'm not too sure how inventive or whatnot that Chris introduced me as, but thanks for that, Chris. I am Ted Zeroni. I work with the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, ERLC. Typically work out of Sherwood Park. I'm out of province today, though, and I'm really happy to be with you. Thank you all for taking time to be here this afternoon. I know it's a busy time of year for you, and I know that it's optional implementation at grade 5. So really appreciate you being here and joining us this afternoon.
All right, you bet. All right, so I'm going to launch right into our slide deck here, and we're going to begin. Hopefully, we have a delay in this thing. I'm not sure why it's slow, so hopefully we're not going to crash on this. But because our living systems in grade 5 has a little bit of a different focus than we have sort of from K to 4, that's been kind of carried through, I've changed up our video as well to kind of reflect when we're starting to look at growth and we're looking at the importance of life, we're looking at the importance of animals and plants. I'm just going to include the medicine wheel in that because that fits very tightly into this. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to listen to this video, and then we'll do the land acknowledgement as well. And maybe not. Yes, there we go.
What is the medicine wheel and why is it so important to the Indigenous culture? Watch this video to find out the foundations to medicine wheel teachings. I'm Mallory Graham, Anishinaabe from tribaltradeco.com. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more videos every week on the Indigenous culture, smudging, and Native teachings. If you're looking for a simple explanation for what the medicine wheel is and why it's so important, then we're here to share the basic teachings to the medicine wheel. Make sure you watch it to the end as we have a special bonus for you. Now, there are 3 important points that you need to know about the medicine wheel teachings. The first important point about the medicine wheel is what exactly is the medicine wheel. The medicine wheel is a circular symbol broken into 4 areas or quadrants. These 4 areas have 4 different colors assigned to them, which are most often yellow, red, black, and white. It is also very important to note that different nations have different medicine wheel teachings according to their stories, values, and beliefs. So there is not only one perfect medicine wheel. The 4 areas of the medicine wheel have attributes assigned to them: the 4 directions, the 4 states of being, the 4 sacred medicines, the 4 seasons, the 4 elements, the 4 stages of life. Some nations use the 4 colors in different locations on the medicine wheel and use the 4 areas on the medicine wheel to represent the 4 colors of people on Mother Earth. Each of the 4 directions or areas have teachings, and each of the set of attributes have their own teachings as well, which we will get to more in the next 2 important points about the medicine wheel. The second point for understanding the medicine wheel teachings is why this circle is so important. The circle represents the circle of life, the circle of self-awareness, and the circle of knowledge. For the circle of life, Indigenous people of North America look to this circle as a reminder that everything flows in a circle. We believe that life continues on and on. Our spirits live forever on earth and then into the spirit world, similar to the circular nature of the seasons and the life cycles. The circle also represents our own awareness of ourselves and our states: mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And in order to be happy, we need all 4 of those states to be balanced. We can be aware of our own balance and help steer ourselves toward a more balanced life, therefore a more happy life. We need to be aware of each set of attributes and what they teach us. For example, in order to exist on Earth, all 4 elements are needed. And not only are they needed, they also need to be in balance. The circle of knowledge is one of my favorite parts, as it represents represents the personal power that we each possess to learn about the different attributes and have control over our states of being to maintain our happiness. And this circle of knowledge means that we use it as a tool and as a system for passing on knowledge. Have you seen the medicine wheel before? If so, where? Please share with us in the comments below. Now, the third point for understanding the medicine wheel teachings is that all aspects of life are interconnected. All creation on Mother Earth was put here for a purpose, and we are all deeply connected. The spirit world is connected to life on Earth, the water is connected to the land, and the sky is connected to the ground. Our connection to the land and to our Mother Earth can directly affect our spiritual well-being, which will then affect our physical health, our emotional health, and our mental health as well. All attributes of the medicine wheel are connected, and we as people are all equal. So all nations of the earth are equally connected to the Creator. If you like these medicine wheel teachings, then download our...
Okay, so the reason I brought this in is those of you who were with us yesterday, we talked a little bit more about the connection with the land, and that man is not, in an Indigenous view, seen as being superior. It is the same as the rock, as the animal, as the plant. Everybody has the same status or importance. And when you tie in the medicine wheel into this, it also talks about how we sustain, how we live, how we maintain a normal balance. So our Living Systems for Grade 5 talks about how we have structures within animals, in this case systems, that maintain and provide health and food and sustenance to and living basic needs like air and oxygen to our system, our body. And then the plants also have a system of their own in order to get food and to get water and to make sure that they are kept in balance at the same time. So it was kind of an important time to bring this in. This is not the only place that you would ever bring in a medicine wheel, because there's so many components to it that we would be able to bring it in a lot of different places for sure. Okay, so let's continue on then with our land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation in a way that history has forgotten. Okay, I'm getting a delay here, and I'm not sure why we're getting a delay. So again, for those who have rejoined us, you see a very common pattern to our sort of table of contents. This is what we will sort of unpack in each of our sessions, followed very much the same sort of procedure or order. It doesn't mean that there won't be some variations, and definitely in some areas, different kinds of examples that we include in there, but that you will understand sort of the opening pieces. What are the big rocks? What are the concepts that live in Living Systems for Grade 5? And what is it that we need to unpack with the students? Equally as well, both in content and skill. And then once I've got kind of that surface level fact piece done, how do I get them to think deeply about that knowledge that we want to do? So it kind of progresses its way down through from 1 to 8. And that's what we're going to do with you today. So I'm going to turn it over to Ted, and he's going to talk a little bit about the backgrounder.
Thanks, Chris. In terms of the backgrounder, it's just we're going to dip back a little bit into the first session just to make some connections. In case you did miss the first one, we won't be doing this necessarily with all of them. But I'd like to begin by saying, when we look at this curriculum and the way it's structured, and the way all of them are structured as a new curriculum, there's some hidden potential there. And I just want to bring that to your attention before we move on. I guess it's just like a smartphone, though. When we get a new innovation, like a smartphone in this particular example, we can use it at a very basic level. For example, the smartphone could be used just to make phone calls. And there are some people who are using it at that level. There are some people who put apps on their phone and they use it for a variety of things. And so they move on up down the road. And when other people show them what the potential of their phone is and what it can be done, more likelihood that people will take that step and trying it out. Because sometimes you look at your phone And without knowing what all those things done, it could be pretty scary unless you're showing the potential. And some people we know even take it all the way to the other end and use it in amazingly a variety of ways, including making their own apps for their for their smartphone. So our progression along using an innovation or using something to its potential really depends on showing a little bit of a way. And that's what we hope to do with Chris and I. And that's why we've focused on the surface deep learning phases of learning, to just show you how perhaps the potential of the curriculum here can move us down a different path. If we just quickly look at the current curriculum, well, I guess current for the end of this year, the 1996 curriculum, if you do look at it carefully, it's really broken down into three big parts. It's the skills, which is really, if you look at that first page of your curriculum guide, you'll see that there's a page of skills, which are two basic ones: science inquiry, which is in a sense the investigation process, and problem solving. And associated with those are specific learner outcomes. There are certain attributes associated with each in each curriculum as well, again, with specific learner outcomes. And I think what we're all familiar with are the topics within the understandings. The word understandings is also in there, and that's the understanding part of the current curriculum houses those topics. And within those topics, of course, are the variety of scientific vocabulary we have. Now, interesting, if you do take a look closely at that first page of the curriculum guide, there is a statement there which maybe we sometimes overlook. We can go to the next slide, Chris. The next slide looks a little bit messy, but I just want to show you what I'm getting at here. The quote at the bottom is taken directly out of this current curriculum, that each topic may be developed as a separate unit of study or linked to other topics and other subject areas. So at the end of the day, what they're saying is that we could take those skills, attitudes, and understandings that we teach from one topic area and integrate it into another topic area. If that topic is color, we can integrate it into another topic that we're using in that particular grade. Or further, as I mentioned, we could take the skills, understanding, and attitudes from science and perhaps other subjects and integrate them into what we do with the other subjects. This kind of approach is probably familiar. We've seen it happen probably at the early primary stages. Our kindergarten teachers are great at integrating this, and primary teachers are. As we go up the grades, though, we teach subjects a bit more separately, and we come back to that whole thing of really teaching it all just as separate topics. Now, if we go to the next slide, things change a little bit, and to help us maybe maneuver us forward to that transfer point. It's a little bit hard to see how we can move from the left to the right in the old curriculum, but the new one, by changing the vocabulary idea to concepts, by working with organizing ideas and understandings, and continuing to work with skills, it becomes a little bit easier to see how these things, the understandings, the knowledge and concepts and the skills, can be integrated to the organizing ideas with other organizing ideas. In fact, the structure of the curriculum allows us to do that. It's much more visible in this curriculum than it is the old curriculum. And as we'll take a look, we can see how we can integrate computer science, for example, within all these other organizing ideas as we go along down that path, or even begin using with other subjects. I was presenting at one session, and a kindergarten teacher put up her hand. Whoa, computer science, it's all about instructions. I can use it here and here and here and here, and already the integration's happening. Many of us are maybe at the further left level, where we're teaching within just sort of topics, or teaching one unit, one organizing idea, teaching it, moving on and going to the next one and the next one without much integration. And perhaps that's where we may be. But if we want kids to really transfer understandings, transfer concepts, transfer skills to new ideas, so they can interpret their world through that lens of their understanding that they learn, not just the textbook there or whatever materials they have in their science classroom, but when they look at the world, they can see their understandings in them. Kids need to help different contexts to help transfer that. And the different organizing ideas and the different subjects can be those different contexts where kids practice and apply those things. No, no one's going to get, if you're at the far left, we're not going to get to the far right in 1 year, 2 years, or so on. What we hope is that we don't remain in that far left, because the potential of this curriculum can move us forward so that the kids, when they leave our school, they will transfer and take with them all those things we know are important: critical, creative thinking, those deep understandings, to be able to take perspectives of things happening around the world through different lenses. All those things are important. The difference between looking at the potential of a curriculum like this, the potential of an iPhone, is the potential of an iPhone is I can decide if I'm going to use it, and the only ones that affected is me. When we take a look at the potential of a curriculum and see how it's organized in such a way that we can get kids to really deeply learn things, I think it's the onus is on us a little bit more to start moving towards that direction, because deciding not to not only impacts me, but it impacts my students as well. Given that, then I think we have to start just quick review when we're talking about moving to transfer. Chris and I are going to show you some steps. So help if you want to move forward, help to move from that surface level of learning the facts, and really we're harping and getting those skills down and really deeply understanding those concepts. That's about the surface level. Moving into the deep thing where we start connecting those concepts together and building the understandings that we talked about in session 1 that was videotaped. And then how can we take those skills and those understandings and use them in new contexts so kids become more competent at using them and be able to actually see those understandings in their world around them. So the foundation of all this is the concept. So just a really quick review of the concept, and then we're going to move on. A concept is an organizing idea of 1 or 2 words, such as fruit. Fruit has distinctive attributes, which is the second thing to remember about concepts. And those attributes are shared by all the examples given. There's something about a pineapple, a banana, an orange, and an apple that makes it we classify it as fruit because it has those characteristics. Concepts, just maybe to develop the idea further, if it's a new term to you, concept is really an organizing construct. We can go to the next slide, Chris. When we see our world, we build schema, we make all those connections in our mind, and that's how our brain is kind of organized by these connected ideas or concepts. So we can imagine concepts are like file folders in our brain, and anything that goes in that file folder has something in common, or it's got the attributes of what that file folder is asked to hold. We label our folders in our computers, for example, assessments, and anything that has the attribute of assessment gets into that file folder, which has the attributes of assessment. When we play I Spy, for example, we're really picking up concepts with a single attribute. It could be something that's red or something that's big or round, but that's what we're really doing when we're playing I Spy, is identifying something in the room that's an example of a larger concept. So concepts, when we can use them because they're transferable, we can use them and see them in different things when we use that as a lens. We look at this picture, for example, you may see concepts come out at you, such as some that are very visible, such as waste. But that waste, if you look a little bit deeper, it might not there, but does this picture also show interaction between humans and the environment? Does this picture show climate? Does this picture show landform? It shows all those things, and that's the idea of the concepts. So we can see them in multiple areas. They transfer from context to context. And in this particular case, we're just going to do one more activity about concepts and take a look at the current curriculum through the lens of concepts. And it's sometimes good to look at through that lens to find those concepts, because when you do that, you'll see that some jump out at you that are repeated. For example, organisms is repeated. And if we were to do that with all the concepts we could see, as we see on the next slide, we'd probably find that many of the things in the guiding question, the learning outcomes, and all the knowledge, understanding, and skills and procedures columns, a lot of them are made up with concepts. The more important, vital ones or anchoring ones, or whatever we want to call them, you could see that they're very repeated. They're repeated often, such as vital biological processes, systems, organisms, and so on. There are some that are used but not repeated a lot. For example, growth is a concept, but it's dealt with quite more deeply in the other grades when we talk about the life cycle of plants and animals, for example. Or when we talk about movement, that's another thing that we know happens in energy, right? So not all the concepts are going to show up a lot in our particularly organizing idea, but no, they're ones we have to pause and make sure kids understand before we go too deeply. The concepts in, is this the, do I think yes, I do have the right one. If we take a look at this organizing idea, I've ranged them, all the ideas and concepts. They're not all concepts in there, but a lot of them are, and arranged them to what I call a concept map. And you can, this will be available to you in your resource packet after this session is done. And it'll give you a chance to map your way through the organizing idea. For example, organisms are systems. Excuse me, organisms have systems, and those systems are internal with animals, and plants have systems as well, which are the transport systems. And when you follow them along, you'll see that they do follow through an organizing way and puts all the ideas together in one sort of larger understanding. That's there for you to look at if you wish when you have that opportunity. So in this one, we are taking a look at all the different systems, the musculoskeletal, respiratory, circulatory, digestive system, and associated organs for animals, and the transport systems for plants in this organizing idea.
And I think what Ted said earlier about making sure that we kind of not live in the left-hand side of just teaching a topic. This has the potential of you wanting to just teach about what are the systems that are related to animals, what are the systems that are related to plants. But there are commonalities between them. There are definitely places where we can compare and contrast. What are the differences? What are the similarities? And they even started that in grade 1, and I'll share some of that with you. But those are important, that we don't just give them the facts and stop here in the different colors and say, did this, done. We need to make them now understand how do all different kinds of animals, not just human systems, but what systems do we find that are the biological systems within a dog or within a cat or within a bird, and then a plant, and are all the plants exactly the same thing, or do they have commonalities? Are there differences there? So those are really important to go back and think about that diagram of surface, deep, and transfer again, that we're trying to really kind of hammer in into our context as we're going through these organizing ideas.
Thanks, Chris. As I said, the structure of this curriculum builds in the potential to move away from teaching just in separate units into that more integrative, iterative component and transfer kind of an idea in the curriculum. Grade 1, for example, begins, some of the key things there are animals and plants and living things and what they need. And when grade 2, we move into what living plants and animals need as they go through the life cycle. And in grade 3, we move from that into food chains. Grade 4, we start taking a look at the external structures of plants and animals. And in grade 5, this time, we're now taking a look more at the internal structures of plant and animals, all related to growth, you can see, all related to survival, all related to those things. So it's a building block that grows into one another. And there may be times when you're beginning your course next year, you may have to do some bridge work and go back. But all the resources for all those other grades will be available for you on the website as well when we're done. But again, it's that integrative nature that this curriculum, at least the structure, has the potential to help build those transfer of ideas from one grade to the other and one organizing idea to the other. Here are all the really key concepts for this particular grade. They're on the left, like organism, internal systems, functions, systems. I didn't list all the different types of systems, but we know that there are the different types, nor did I list all the organs there and processes. I've identified function and system because they're ones that appear often in the discussion. They appear often in videos and even process. And I highlighted those because you'll also see as we go along, not only some examples how you can work these in and use resources to teach these, but specifically because function and system isn't really noted too much in there. It's an important one that kids need to do because they're going to come across those words a lot. So I just highlighted those. The ones on the left are ones that were pre-first grades that were taken. All those they're not developed. They're used in this curriculum to move the kids thinking forward. So if you need to get resources to help with those, Chris will share some with you today, but you can always go back to those grades to get resources to help develop those concepts as well. So what we'd like to do now is just go through some instructional approaches that are useful to help teach those concepts at the surface level. And what I mean by the surface level, again, is just that basic, deep understanding level of individual concepts in this particular case. So a concept has a definition, but it also has examples and non-examples, and giving kids opportunities to create examples of the concept, to find examples of the concept in videos or pictures or stories. And non-examples as well really helps them to deepen that understanding. So the more we can give them those different contexts to explore that individual concept, the better we go. And so we're going to go through some instructional approaches that are helpful to teach some of the key concepts in this organizing idea. So now, when you're doing this, don't teach all the concepts at once, because there's a lot there. Take a look at your cusp and you'll see how they progress. That in each cusp line, there's a set of concepts and the knowledge, and they appear in the understanding and then the skills procedures. So those are the ones you want to pull out and all those concepts and teach at the surface level first. And then you can work on the others as you move down the cusp lines. Go ahead, Chris.
So card sort would be one of those instructional strategies. Some of you may be very familiar with them and some of you may have never used them. I do like them. This Living Systems unit for all grades really has a good component that you can use the card sorts for, and from different perspectives. So as the grade K to 4 teachers found out, we can use one common set of cards pretty much for all 4 grades, but you're looking at it through a different lens. You're looking at it through either function or need, or could be feature that an animal has, etc. So depending on the grade, I might look at them and sort those cards very differently. It provides a teacher a really great way of a formative assessment right off the hop when I give the cards to the students. If I don't give them a lot of information, I don't give them a lot of direct instruction and simply say, how would you group these? How might you sort these? Just to get a sense of what they already know, even as a pre-assessment, is a great way for me to engage them. And it's fun for the kids because they've got to talk it through with their partners and decide where they're going to put things and what does somebody know that somebody else doesn't know about something. So in this case, we've used the card sort quite a bit. You see that Ted's listed a number of them here already, where we've used them for living and non-living. We use them for plants and animals for those different components. So I've highlighted some of the ones from grades 1 and 3. It's not that we didn't use them in K and 2, we did, but really for what we're doing in this particular unit in grade 5, the 1 and 3s would be the great bridging pieces that you might want to consider. Just the card sort that you see here, starting off with, do they know the difference between living and non-living? So we have to remember that if you are going to be doing the grade 5 next year, you may or may not have students who've done any of the new work in the new curriculum. So there is going to be a need for you to be cognizant of what were some of the big rocks that happened in those 5 grades, K to 4 previous, that in a perfect world, had they been through everything, they would have landed at your doorstep already having some of that background. For now, we have to assume they don't. And so we could use the card sort to make it as simple as, can you group these into living and non-living? And for grade 5 students, that probably is going to be a very easy sort, but now they become familiar with the cards and they become familiar also with kind of that notion of sorting. Always don't assume that they've got everything right and that they understand it all. We want to hear, why did you put it there? What was your reason? Explain to us what were the relationships between all the cards that you put in living? What did you see? How did you make the decision to put them there? What did you decide to put them, the non-living, and so on? Just doing isn't going to be enough. So at the primary year, grade 1, we asked them, what's the relationship between the living ones? What's the relationship between the non-living ones, right? So that they see. And then we move forward into grade 3, where we're talking a lot about plants and animals. So how do I distinguish between the plant and the animal? Again, a grade 5 student isn't going to have too much difficulty with that. But once they've got them sorted, are there other layers that we can sort them again? Can you take the animals and resort the animals? And if they did, how would they regroup the animals, just the animals? Are there plants that they would regroup differently as well? If I just looked at the plants, would there be new groups that I could create under the title of plants? And then again, why did you put them together? What was your thinking? What did the group feel that they put them together? So in grade 4, we might take those same cards that we did and look at it from the appearance of habitat, appearance, and structure. So I have a beak, okay? I have a curved beak, for example. That's the appearance that I see. That's a structure that's on my body. What's the purpose of that? Like, why do I have that versus a pointed beak, right? If I am a bird that picks up seeds versus an animal that shreds meat and eats that. So how do I explain and how do I put the cards in order based on that? So again, those cards were used in grade 4 to look at those classifications. And we specifically asked them to do these 3, not all at the same time. We did the appearance first, unpack all of those appearances because some students would have done them differently. And then could they resort them into a new group? Could they get together with another group and see how they did it? And then we could look at habitat and structures. Do you want to talk to this one, Ted?
Yeah, just briefly, again, using the card sort, this one you could work with the concept function. As I said, function doesn't show up as a key one in the knowledge, but we use it all the time when we're talking about the function of the organs, for example, in this organizing idea, the function of the system. And if you know, if you're not too sure and your students know what function is, you could use a little card sort with them and you could see that I already have them pre-sorted into different functions such as cutting tools or tools that help us to push things into something, right? And we got those connecting things with the glue and screws and so on. So you can get pictures like that or something like that. Again, using that card sort to help students understand what a function is. And of course, you can move into a Freyer model with this. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But as Chris mentioned, this is a really important strategy, just because your kids are analyzing, which is one of the things they need to do when we're talking about investigations. They're looking at the properties of things. They're looking at things from so many different angles. When you do a card sort, it's just a powerful thing to get kids really moving, and then you could turn it into a discussion thing, which we'll talk about later. Sorry, I took over the Chris.
Oh, no, that's good. I'm glad you did. That's great. Case studies are another one that are a great way for us to introduce. And again, it doesn't mean I have to stand up and deliver information first and then do some reading or maybe I'm going to put a bunch of pictures up on the wall. So a case study just offers students an opportunity to hear a story, to see a bunch of pictures and find connections even before we've been taught. What did they see that's there? What did they learn from the story? That we can tease out what were some important pieces that they heard in the part that they read, or I gave you 2 things to read, and what did you see that were common between the 2 and what were very different amongst them? That's a fast way for me to start pulling information out without just giving here's notes on the board, copy them down. That's not going to necessarily help a student get to deeper learning. So we want them to understand, first of all, what did they learn? What did they hear? What did they see? How am I going to start making some of those connections? And so a case study would be a good one where you might read a story about animals, and given the different animals that you're reading about, you unpack the different ways that we classify them based on what they eat. And so that would be one way that we could do that. Again, a case study could be the very first thing that they absolutely start in a unit, or you could have already started and now say, you know, we've learned a few things. Here's 3 pieces of literature I want you to read, and they could be just short 1-pagers. What do they have in common? How can we tie what we've just learned into what you've just read, and what conclusions can we draw? So again, it just gives them that opportunity to connect their understanding. I'm going to suggest that because of what we're going to be doing here in our living systems, we could show students 3 photographs, right? And we could say, so these are roadways. And if we look at the photograph of how this road is connected, and they get very much more complicated. So we have lines that guide us where we turn. We have intersections that give us direction, and they allow us access to new locations and new directions as well. So I wouldn't be saying all that to students. I'm just unpacking this right now if you've never done it with pictures before. And then the third picture I might have, and I would have these separated. I mean, I wouldn't stack them like this, but wow, this is a huge connector, right? I have all of these different places. I see these roads. Somebody had to design that road. Somebody had to make sure that when I turn off here, I don't crash into somebody else going in a different direction. So there is a lot of thought that goes into creating this kind of a road system. I might show them those 3 pictures. If this was me unpacking this unit, this is what I would probably do just to start off with, because I like doing that kind of stuff. I would show them 3 pictures and then say, okay, we're gonna leave the pictures up on the wall, but now we're going to read this story called Investigating the Human Body. And kids are going to not necessarily make the connection about, you showed me roads and now we're going to talk about the human body. And yes, that's where we're going to go. I've given you the information here about the book that I'm going to show you. It's a great little book. It doesn't unpack every system, but it gives me enough information that I could just read about one of the systems. For example, I could do the cardiovascular system. It gives me just a 1-pager. And that's all I'm looking for really right now. Respiratory system. So they're asked to unpack a number of different systems. So I read these little bits and 1-pagers to them, and we can show them the pictures or however you want to do that. These are the ones that we're unpacking in our systems. But now I might ask the question, how do you relate the road system pictures that I showed you to these 4 systems that we just read a 1-pager about and showed you a few questions? So that they start to think about the road system had to be constructed. It had to be made sure that things fit together well, that people didn't crash when they came off of a rampway into head-on traffic because somebody made a direction error, right? So it's the same thing in our body. Our body has systems within it, and it functions smoothly together. And that's kind of where we want them to start thinking in those terms. This is still pretty surface level, but I want them to start thinking in terms of these are connected systems. They're not just standalones. Yes, I might learn about them as standalones first. I might have to know a little bit about the circulatory system because some kids might just the heart and blood, right? That's true. That includes in the circulatory system, but there's also a whole bunch of veins and arteries that run through our body that we need to learn about, which is just like that big traffic thing that we saw. Digestive system, same thing. Respiratory system, musculoskeletal system. So again, I would want them to learn a little bit about this. And what I'm showing you right now isn't something I took out of a book. This is right out of the knowledge column of your curriculum document. It already tells you what are the major organs that we want them to understand within the systems. You are not doing Bio 30 here. You're not doing a deep dive where they have to do a venture and make a diagnosis, but they do have to know enough about this system and how it functions that I can ask the question, how are they connected? So I'm going to learn about each one of these individually. And then as I learn about one and I learn about the second one, before I get into the third one, I want to start making some connections already. So a logical order for me, and this is just my own personal, is that I would probably start with the circulatory system first, and then I would work my way into the respiratory system, and then work my way into the digestive system, because those 3 are so tightly linked together. And then we could talk about the body system, the muscles and the bones that go along with it. So that would be my suggestion, just because of the way they are linked together and what kinds of things we want them to know. So the human body systems, there's lots of them, and students need to know that it's not just the ones that are given in the document that we're only going to focus on those. There are more. We're not going to unpack them all, but I do think it's important that they know that there is one that deals with your glands, and that there's one that's reproductive, and that there's one that has to do with your excretory, your urine and your solid waste output. All of those. Nervous system is a big one. I'm not really sure why that isn't in here yet, but it isn't, right? So there are all kinds of systems. We're going to stick to just a small number so that we can unpack them and understand how they are connected. So they're called vital biological processes, but they're systems. Okay, these vital biological processes are different kinds of systems within the body. So those 2 words need to be really unpacked with students. What does it mean to be a vital? Vital means the body's not going to survive without one of them, right? We need to have them. You're not going to live without your heart and blood. You're not going to live without breathing, and you're not going to live without food. So one of the 3 is gone, we're not alive anymore, right? So that's a conclusion that students should come to on our own, not for us telling them. But these are systems that live within systems. So this is why we wanted to show them that world work. Talk about this one, Ted, Freyer model.
Sure, the Freyer model is just one way to help students develop a definition for the concept and provide examples. I won't click on one exactly, but for example, when Chris already developed this idea of system using the network of highways. So the Freyer model is really a sheet of paper broken into 4 parts. One part is what's the definition of, in this case, system. What are the key characteristics of system, which is parts working together, essentially? What are some examples of system in another quadrant? And then what are some non-examples of systems in a different quadrant? So the Freyer model helps students to consolidate their understanding, again, working not only with the definition, but providing examples, non-examples, once they can see. There's a couple, Chris says, we have some there listed for you. Organism is one that we've used, that's been used up to grade, well, introduced early in grade 4. Up to that point, it was living and non-living things and plants and animals. Finally, we get to organisms in grade 4 and 5. Interaction is a word that comes up a lot if you want to help develop your students with the word understanding interaction, or that concept interaction. There's an activity that ends with a Freyer model there. So you could take a look at that. You can just press the link on the slide deck or go to the website when we have all those things listed there. The next slide just is another example of system that, and you notice what Chris and I are doing with these examples is that we're at the surface level. We're introducing these ideas with course content that kids aren't necessarily responsible for at this point, right? When Chris was developing the concept of system, she was using highways and things that kids are familiar with, highways and patterns and roadways, especially if they've lived in a city, right? There's things happening. There's another way you could do it with, that helps. And if you're going to do this activity, kids, there's an activity you could follow later that helps students understand what a function is, because we talk about that all the time, what interaction is. You'll find the links there and those activities listed there. So make sure they know that first. But then again, you could just give them an example of a Rube Goldberg system, a little machine. This is the 2-minute video. And then you could ask kids to look at the part. What's the function of those parts? What's the interaction? And what does each part do? And what's the role of the whole system do? And then give them that another Freyer model sheet. So again, these are different ways to teach, introduce kids to some of the big concepts that they're going to be working with. Next, another way to introduce concepts to kids at the surface level is with the concept attainment model. Many of you may be familiar with that. It's giving kids one at a time examples and non-examples of the concept. It's kind of like a card sort, except it sort of moves it up. In a card sort, kids are organizing the cards first into sort of examples of their categories and not. This eliminates that parts and has the teacher already designed, well, I'm going to pre-group them and one at a time presenting an example, the concept, a non-example, an example, a non-example. And by looking at the things similar in the example part, kids start seeing the attributes a little bit and they compare it against non-examples. Well, that's not an example because it doesn't have what that other thing has. And so that's the kind of what the concept attainment does. There's a bunch listed there for you. The first 2 are kind of, I think are important, like perhaps more work to do on it. But if you want to talk about different relationships with kids, that's often a question we have. So what's the relationship between those 2? Well, for them to help understand what a relationship is, there's an activity there. And the second one underneath it goes into building relationships and to showing those relationships in concept maps. And there's other introductory lessons there for you if you want. I've included investigation and all those other things in there because when it comes to scientific methods, we're going to be using a lot of these terms, so you can use those there. Take a look at those. You can use them the way you want, or you can tinker with them. They may be not at your grade level, but they can be really good idea sparkers if you want to enhance them a little bit. So have access to the whole slide deck that each of those are built on to use or change in whatever way you think is good for you. That's just another surface level activity. And so all that surface level activity is to help build the skills, or the concept before we start moving into the understanding, to start connecting all the ideas together. But another thing we build at the surface level are the skills. So if kids are going to be doing a comparing and contrasting, we want to make sure they know what it means and how to do some of those things. And again, just like when we use the concept or the introduction of some of the concepts, such as using a Rube Goldberg machine or using the context of highway, you want to introduce the skills to students and have them practice it using some stuff they're not necessarily responsible for in terms of course material. So they can practice using the skill without really worrying about and dividing their focus between learning the skill and the context or the content itself. So this will happen at the service level as well. The next slide shows all the difference that the fewer, they've eliminated the number of skills and procedures with this organizing idea, but they're fairly straightforward. And this is for the most part, a very, I guess, knowledge or fact rich organizing idea. And so a lot of the skills are very similar, where you're examining the transport systems of plants and animals, describing their functions as the last one, for example. So it's a very, focusing on just those things and those particular things about plants and animals and the different parts of them. Same with identifying the digestive and respiratory circulatory system and so on, and the body parts associated with them. That's again connecting what's part of each system and knowing that. The ones that really start getting into the more higher levels relating, and there's different ways we could relate. When you do take a look at the concept attainment ones, there's an example of how to introduce relating to the kids. If you want to do that, feel free to use that. But that's one of the skills and procedures that when we getting into the deep level, getting students to relate ideas, to relate understandings, relate concepts to each other. That's when we're getting into the deep level. So getting kids to make those relationships whenever possible is really helpful for them, because once they can do that, they start getting a broader understanding and an understanding that can be applied in a whole bunch of different contexts. So next slide, Chris. These are some of the key ones then that do show up in living systems. Investigate is one, and it's not a true investigation in terms of doing an experiment, but I'll talk about those in a second. Discuss shows up quite often in most of the organizing ideas, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Relating, as we said, and comparing and contrasting is another one that does show up. Not necessarily in this one, I made it a little bit smaller, but you'll see where it will be very helpful for kids to use this skill in this organizing idea. Yeah, next slide. I do want to talk at this point about computer science and scientific methods. Both of them are very skill-based organizing ideas. In other words, we're probably not going to be just teaching these as an isolated organizing idea. We have some people, we'll talk about this later, these will be unpacked separately, but it's important to take a look at this now, because you can see how some of these will be really helpful. Some of these skills will be really helpful for you when we're unpacking some of these things. Grade 2, computer science really works with instructions. Grade 3 introduces computational thinking, and it means breaking things down to a smaller task and redoing it and breaking it a problem into its components, basically. Grade 4, kids are learned to design process, which is a process kids are introduced to create algorithms or products or create artifacts. So that design process is introduced to them. And by grade 5, then students need to know what instructions are, computational thinking, design thinking, because at the end of the day, students are asked in grade 5 computer science to design things to meet human needs. Maybe already you could see a connection that if I was going to design something, I could bring in the whole idea of systems and parts and functions and design our own Rube Goldberg machine or design our own system. But we'll talk about computer science a little bit later. But once again, those are also skills that likely need to come into play into the organizing ideas, but you'll be given examples as these organizing ideas are unpacked. Same with scientific methods. I just want to point out that the key thing with scientific methods is that an investigation follows certain steps. Those steps are, for the most part, outlined in grade 2. You won't see them again because it's expected that those scientific inquiry steps are carried into grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5. I've underlined in the grade 2 under planning and planning the investigation, because there's something added onto there in grade 5, and that's the idea of controlled experiments and variables. So in grade 5, they're doing investigations that can be controlled experiments. They're going to have a dependent, independent variable, and an experiment in their planning this investigation. That's how they're going to do it. And then they conduct all the other steps. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But again, skills that kids can be using in every organizing idea, not just scientific methods. Go ahead, Chris. One way to introduce some of those skills is direct teaching. When you get to the point, we may want to say, well, look, we're going to do some investigating class, and here's how investigations happen. This happens, this happens. What these examples do for you is break the skills down into smaller skills and make sure that students understand some of the key vocabulary, key concepts associated with those skills. There's some examples there that might help you along the way for investigating and comparing and contrasting. And of course, the Venn diagram is another skill that kids can be useful for getting kids to do the comparison and contrasting. I think, Chris, you have some examples to share with this.
Yeah, and these aren't newer ones. These are actually from grade 1, but they have relevance in here again, because what we ask the grade 1s to do is just take hula hoops and let's get kids out of their desks anyway. So hula hoops easy to throw on the floor. You can give me cards and I can start putting them in wherever I think they belong. Now, in this case, we gave them what plants need and what animals need, and they're put right at the top. But again, as students and they're older in grade 5, we just give them a bag of cards and let them put things where they belong rather than us telling them. And then going back and asking them why did you put things here? But this one does very much relate to the kinds of things that we want, like how do systems intertwine with each other? How does the circulatory system and the respiratory system work together? Like what's the exchanges there and what do they have in common? So again, it would be a way for students to identify their knowledge and to be able to explain their understandings 2 systems at a time. And then maybe I bring in a 3rd system, right? Or I take the first 2 and then I take the 3rd one and I take the 2nd and 3rd and then the 1st and 3rd. And then I put 3 hula hoops together and say, okay, now that I've done each one of them as a comparison, how do I do those pieces? So some of that information about them could be from a direct teaching piece or a direct learning piece about each of the systems. The power comes in and the deeper understanding will come in when you start to compare them and say, what do they have? What's the differences between them? What are their similarities? The Venn diagram research tells us is one of the most powerful, simple, but powerful tools that we can put in front of students, because I can't just take individual bits of information and find my way through here. I need to know something about a lot of things, and I need to be able to interconnect those pieces before I can start placing things into a Venn diagram. So it's a really good one for them to practice and do. Life processes. Remember, when we're talking about what is a life process, and then are there things that they might have in common? So even if they didn't know a lot about the systems themselves, we reproduce, we take in nutrients, we grow and develop. This is the kind of thing that was actually unpacked in a slightly easier language for grade 1s and grade 2s as they were learning about basic needs and how an animal and a plant survives. So this is really where it was going to. It was taking those individual starting points from grade 1 and sort of landing them already, getting them ready for the pieces that you're going to be doing now in the vital biological systems that the students are going to be doing. Okay, Ted.
So we take a look at our curriculum guide. We know that there's the one column is the knowledge. That's where all the concepts and everything are housed, and the skills over here. And then in the middle, we have the understandings. And that's where we start putting those individual concepts all together into a statement of understanding. So when we move from surface, then we've learned some of the basic skills that we're going to maybe use in this cusp. We've practiced them. We've really developed those concepts. And now we're going to put them all together into an understanding. And that's what the deep level is making those connections between the concepts, and then taking that concept or the understanding statement and applying it to different contexts. So we'll see I think there's just the 2 understandings with this one. They're fairly specific. that humans are complex organisms with biological systems that can carry out vital biological processes. But you can see then how Chris and I have developed those individual concepts. Organisms was one that was done in grade 4, but the biological systems and biological processes are being added onto that now. And what we want to do, if we were to ask that question to students to see if they have that understanding, would say, is it true that humans are complex organisms with biological systems that can carry out vital biological processes? How is that? What does that mean? Can you give me an example of that? And they should be able to demonstrate their understanding by talking about the different biological systems that we studied. Same thing goes with the plants, right? That they're complex organisms with complex systems. Some strategies that really help students to demonstrate their understanding in that way is discussing. And discussing is at this age, they may be able to discuss in writing, and of course, that would be something you would have to introduce and show them. But quite often, the discussing happens verbally with other students. And discussing is a very powerful deep strategy tool for you to listen in on, to hear what kids are saying, not necessarily in a class discussion where people put up the hand and some people dominate the conversation, but really at the skills and the surface level, teaching, again, specifically, what is a discussion? What is involved in the discussion? What does a good discussion look like? What does a horrible discussion look like? What's an example, non-example? And I may be making a checklist of things that you want to see in students when they're discussing, so that when they use the skill to demonstrate their understanding, it becomes a powerful tool for them. And of course, discussing isn't just means that, like I said, sitting in rows and putting up the hand, as I'm sure you all know, you've probably seen all these things and used many discussion ways, such as the next slide. There's all different ways you can get kids to discuss, whether it's in pairs or triads or larger groups. These are all some examples of discussion formats and a really good opportunity for kids to really think about what it is you're giving them to discuss and hone in and listen to the things they say to hear their level of understanding and maybe perhaps some misconceptions that they have. Another deep level strategy is to use representations. Representation, again, is using some other format than what the original format was. In our particular case, we usually introduce things in words and verbal ways. So can students represent the understanding of what they've seen in a nonverbal way, for example? And of course, representing is a variety of things that you're, again, familiar with, but they're here just as a reminder. On the next slide, we can use things like infographics, cartoon strips, news report, puppet shows. And the thing is, when you're getting kids to represent ideas, as you know, it's not just that it's the representation, but helping them explain is how does their representation demonstrate the understanding that you want them to express. Well, a powerful tool is for students to demonstrate their understanding is a concept map. And I'll talk about that. I think maybe in my next slide, I think I have an example. If we were to take this first understanding that humans are complex organisms with complex biological systems, we can use a concept map to help students generate some of those understandings, to show you that they understand the complexity of biological systems and biological processes. The next slide shows that, and it's quite connected to one of the skills and procedures as well. Remember that at the deep level now, we get to that phase where we're connecting these things together. So we know kids know what a digestive system is all about. They know what lungs do. They know what veins. Actually, blood vessels should probably be there instead of veins. I'll change that. But they know what those are independently. But what are the connections between all that? And if you take a look at the skills and procedures statement carefully, it's talking about the relationships between body systems that are involved in moving oxygen and nutrients throughout the body. So once again, going back to the skill level, if kids aren't good at making concept maps, you'll want kids to practice making concept maps before they use this to demonstrate their learning to you. Because if you were to get this kid to you, what are the relationships between these things? They may not get it unless they fully understand what a really good grasp of what a relationship is. And if you're using a concept map, they're familiar with how to work those, so they can demonstrate their understanding to you. And it might show something like this in the next slide. That's maybe one way to organize those, but if a student organized it this way, I'd say, well, explain why, what does that show you? Well, shows that that digestive system in the end, creates nutrients that's taken into the blood, that's moved around to the parts of the body, by the circular system, and same with the oxygen, which is pulled out of the air through the respiratory system and then put into the blood and circulated throughout the body. But they would explain it in much more detailed fashion than I'm doing now, because I want to move on to the next slide. So you can see how powerful concept maps are in getting kids to demonstrate their understanding to you.
Well, and again, you can also just do 2 systems at a time, give me small amounts of cards, make some connections, and then add the 3rd one in, then add the 4th one in, right? If it's too much for them to start with, start small, but this is a great way to see whether or not they're catching on to the connections that we want them to see.
And again, I have to say again, that surface level, those are things we teach at the surface level, right? We're going to do some concept maps. So you're going to want to make sure kids are good at those. Again, introducing them with things that they're already familiar with, not necessarily course content. So they focus on developing concept maps.
So you've seen all these different instructional strategies, and you're hearing, and I'm hope at this point feeling quite comfortable about connecting the ideas. So kind of weighed out, I'm not sure where I was going to put some of these, but where do I get all the info first? Like, where am I going to get the info to teach them about this so that I can start making some connections, because I don't have any resources. So what I'm going to share with you now is just a number of different pieces that you can use, and I would not suggest you would use everything. But there is lots here that you would be able to leverage as you start to unpack, but not just to teach and unpack and facts. I need the facts, but I need to make those connections as I go. So I have different sections in here for you with the circulatory system. There's a number of different videos that you can use. Again, each one of them offers a section of commonality. But again, each one offers just a little bit deeper learning and something new in each one. So if I were to show circulatory system one day and unpack it with them, I might use a different one the next day as a rerun, just to make sure I've solidified some thinking, but there'll always be something new. And that could be a question: what did we learn new today about this system? And then I could come back and do another one another day. And again, I'm going to get the same common pieces, but I'm also going to hear something new. So what else do I add to my list of information? Sorry, these always start as soon as we hit go here. So then I have the respiratory system. And again, the pieces on the organs that I'm supposed to look at. It isn't, again, it's not deep dive in Bio 30, but you can't make it surface and just say, well, you breathe in your lungs. You got to know something about that. So what are the components that they need to know? And there are some investigations that I've included in here. One of them is exploring how we breathe. You can actually make your own little lungs so that they understand what the process is that is involved in breathing. And when I pull that down and I create the vacuum to breathe in and breathe out, how does that work in the real world when it comes about the blood coming near the alveoli, and what's the exchange that happens there, so that they start to get a sense of what that's going to be like. As we move on, I've got more on the respiratory system. There's a number in here as well that I'll give you some resources at the end where they can do different investigations with each of the different systems. We are unpacking, we mentioned that the reproductive system is a part of life. I mean, in the absence of reproductiveness, there would be no life, obviously, but we're not doing a dive into the reproductive system itself. So that is mentioned, the purpose of it. We also do that in basic needs. We talk about that as any life cycle for any animal or plant requires reproduction, but we don't get into this system at this point in time.
What's up?
The digestive system, same thing, gives you quite a bit. This is an interactive one at the top. It's not just underlined, but it's also an interactive link. So when you get the slide deck, you can go in and explore the pieces that I put in here. Again, we want students to really understand what are the components of the digestive system. And I guess from my perspective is once I've started to put, let's say, the circulatory and the respiratory system, and I've done some comparative work with them already about that, and how are they similar, how are they different? I would do the same then with the circulatory and just digestive and respiratory and digestive. But then I might even ask the question somewhere down the road is, what if one of those 4 systems fails? Is there any one of the four that we can do without and survive? Is there any one that we, if it goes down, we would die instantly, right? It's just, do they understand what the connections are? That big highway, are there places where the ramps actually would cause an accident and death? What would that look like? So what system, if any, would cause us an issue like that? So digestive system, again, you've got multiple different videos here that you can use to unpack the information. Again, I wouldn't show them all at the same time. I would just do bits and pieces. And then the musculoskeletal system. So our muscles and our bones. And students often don't think of those as being really, really important. But I often say, how do you think a human is different than a snail? We don't look the same. I said, no, we don't look the same. But why don't we look the same? What do we have that they don't? And what do they have that we don't, right? Like, how do they move? We don't slide along in slime, but we move along in feet, but we do that because why? Right? So kids need to understand that there's a connection there and that they're not standing upright for a reason. So understanding all of these ones that are in here are hyperlinked for you and give you bits of information, and as well as some activities and some lessons that you can do with the students. So again, I'm not going to go into every because we don't have the time to do that, but you will have access to all of these. I'm going to include, I think I skipped one here. There we are. So plants are complex animals and organisms. So we're going to do the same thing with, if I've done comparative analysis, you've got all these different activities that we can do. I can do the Venn diagrams. What about the plants, right? Now I need to unpack the plants. And I need students to understand that, no, they don't have a heart beating, but what keeps a plant going? How come a plant is able to suck up water, and how does that work, right? How do they get their food? If we go out and fertilize, where are they getting that fertilizer? How is that enhancing it? Where is it coming from? So again, identifying the external structures. This comes from a previous grade, but it's really timely to fit in here. And because you need to do a little bit of bridging, I've included this in here because it would give you that stepping stone that they haven't had yet about this external structure about before we get into the systems, and then the parts and functions of them. Just again, very simple. We're not getting into big, deep dissection of plants here, but it would be really appropriate to have an investigation in plants as well. Like, how do plants move food? How do plants move water? So xylem being, when I'm talking about water transport, and I'm talking about phloem being the food, and I always say the F goes together, food and phloem, right? That's an easy one for them to remember. But again, how does that work? How does that get sucked up? If you think of that really simple old investigation that you probably did as a kid too, where you were asked to bring a celery stick to school and you took some dye and put it into water and you put the celery in there, and a couple of days later, or even a day later, you picked it up and you saw that it had been sucked up into the celery itself. That's a simple investigation, but we can unpack that with kids. We can set that up, and then we can actually ask them why. How did that happen? What brought that forward? Again, looking at transportations within a leaf. How does a leaf help the plant? Without getting into the deep worlds of photosynthesis, we do have to talk a little bit about sugars and the fact that leaves and plants are good for us. They give oxygen off. They live off of our waste product of carbon dioxide. So it's a nice transition between humans and plants that we want that connection there, right? We need that connection. Again, so we want to talk about what are some of the different pieces. So you've got lots of videos here that you'd access. Finding just kind of where you're at with them and the pieces that you need. There's some slide decks here that you may wish to use, individual ones talking about photosynthesis, just the process of it, a very simple way of doing it, carbon dioxide in, oxygen out, and that they need water in order and sunlight for that to happen. Again, what are the purpose of the roots? Maybe you want to have a fill in. Do they know anything about different components of that? How could I investigate this? So that's the celery one. That's a good one, but that's not the only one. I'm just saying that's a common, easy one. Doesn't cost you a lot of money. It's just bring a bunch of containers, water, food, dye, and away we go. Talking about seeds, purpose of seeds, and how does that fit into a plant? Yes, we used to always grow plants, and we still can do that. We do that in others, organizing ideas, but it would fit in here as well. What are we seeing? How are we seeing that they're unfolding, and what is it they're drawing their nutrients from? So an investigation offers me the opportunity to really explore and unpack what I need to do with a student. It gives me an opportunity for them to show me that they do know how to put steps in place to carry out those steps and to come up with what they hope their hypothesis and their predictive question, or their question that they opened with, or their statement that they're predicting will happen. Did it happen? And what's their conclusion? So this is a good step already into what Ted talked about in scientific method, where it's already laid out in grade 2. You're going to have to review that with them because they may not come to your doorstep with that information. So we're going to go through those steps. Maybe doing the celery with the colored water is a good model for us to set up an investigation. So I'm going to do it with you guys. We're going to write down all the things that we would do together. We're going to talk about how we would carry it out. We're going to talk about how we're going to get the conclusion that we have, and what did we find out, etc. Right? Before they get do that I've given you is, how does exercise affect breathing and heart rate? And is that important in the body? And why is that important, right? Those are all connections and pieces that we need students to have available to them. So I've given you a link here where you can go in. This is a document which not only serves as an investigative document, but it has information at the front. There's a number of different investigations at the back. This one refers to 1C. I would even do the frog one, where they compare a human to a frog. What's the difference in the systems? They do a dissection, they tell them how to do it. We don't do that anymore, but you can do those through video, watching them do a dissection. I've given you links in that as well. So there's lots of different ways that students can unpack some of this. It's not about just one piece. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Ted.
We're going to be brief on assessment on this, but we'll provide more about assessments and how to assess through the phases as we go along here. But just as a quick reminder, when we need to do some pre-assessing like we would ordinarily do, assess what the students, to what degree they understand the concepts associated with the organizing idea. Taking a look at the cusp line, what skills are you going to, what kind of things you're going to get kids to demonstrate the understanding, making sure they're good at that skill, or he's competent in it to be able to demonstrate of it. Once you've done that, if you've taught a little bit to help increase those skills, and of course we do some formative assessments to decide, okay, they understand the concepts and they're good at the skills. Now we can go into putting them together and to work with those understandings. And if we do some more formative assessment, say, okay, they're ready to go off on their own now. I'm going to have them maybe do an investigation independently and giving them the context. Maybe if the celery is something that they haven't done before, as Chris mentioned, that might be a transfer summative assessment that you would do. Again, asking those questions at the end of the day that come back to those key understandings, hooking up the transfer activity to those understandings that the kids are responsible for. So we'll talk more about assessment that way, but a lot of what you can do is all the learning activities that are shared with you in this video, they really, if you observe, they can become those formative assessments along the way. And there's multiple examples of each of them along the way, or different activities that develop things differently, same ideas, but different activities to develop. And you can choose one that might be your assessment activity. Of course, the skills and procedures statements can be used as assessments, but we just have to be careful of what we're getting at here. For example, in just examining the function of the different systems, you're really getting down to that surface level. What is the function of the digestive system? What is the function of this? It's getting down to really that surface level. We're not necessarily connecting at this point. Same with the second one, where it's identify. All right. The major body parts, like what are the major organs associated with each one? It's still at that surface level. And finally, even the examining the transport system of plants and animals and describing their functions, it's kind of a knowledge level. But when we start getting into the whole relationship of things and how these things work together, that's when we start getting to that deep level. And we know that kids have working at that level that has all those concepts interrelated to there. So when you take a look at those skills and procedures, just keep that in mind. There are some that you could probably throw some more in there, for example, just by asking students, what is a system, and give me an example of different systems. Could be another assessment at the surface level to make sure kids have those concepts understood before we move on.
And I
And Chris
just
has a transfer activity for you here as well.
just some suggestions. That's all they are. I mean, they're not necessarily the ones that you would want to use. It depends on how you set it up, but there's some questions in here. How would your digestive system be effective if the circulatory failed? Right now, there's a good connection. Like, what do they know, and how are they going to justify their thinking? Compare and contrast frog's biological system and processes to a human. So this is where I've given you the dissection. He goes through it. It's with kids there, so it might be kind of fun for them to watch that. But again, just to learn about, there are definitely commonalities, but a frog doesn't look like us and has some differences. But there's also one on PBS that you can do as a dissection. There's a part 1 and a part 2. I've given you both. Or another one would be, and this would be a nice deep transfer question, is, how does the body's fight or flight response demonstrate how systems work together? Right, when you're in a scary situation, some students might not know what that is. May have to look it up first and do a little bit of research. But wow, something really drastic happens suddenly. There are things that happen in your body and that get shut down for a reason. Often when after an accident, people say, I'm really hungry. And that's a common thing. I used to work in the ER, and people would come in, I'm so hungry. And that's because your system shuts down all the blood flow and keeps it for whatever it needs it. So your stomach isn't one that gets a lot right then, right? And then when it comes back, you feel like that urge to be, you just want to eat something.
I think I got everything I need. Should be.
So other ones that I've given you are just some samples you might want to do with living systems. There's the links in here. There's one with the triple, if you want to digest that one with students. Again, these are just samples that I've given you that you might be able to use. And this one we've provided for all of the grades, right from kindergarten up. If you're working as a team in your school, maybe in a division, you want to get together and use the same sort of assessment rubric. It's a sample. I'm not saying it's a must do, but it would give you common language, common terminology. And then behind all of this, you have the scientific method and computer science that Ted has already talked about. We will have more of those embedded within each of your folders as our counterparts have a few minutes to get them ready for you. There will be some specific to each organizing idea, and then there'll be some very general ones. And if they're very general, we'll just keep putting them into the session 1 folder. So that's where you'll find them for both. And I've given you, this is that sheet that I told you about that has investigations and documentation in it, as well as teaching stuff. So I'm giving you a bunch of resources here that you can go into if you need extra ones over and above what I've shown you already. There's a couple of books that would be really great if you're into graphic, not novels, but these are graphic science books. Kids love them because it has the Max Axiom super guy in it, but this is all about the digestive system. It's a great one. So there's one that you could consider as a resource. Sparklebox is another one. We've showcased that for a number of you already in other grades, but this is a great one for science and math, free. You don't have to worry about royalties. And in this one, I've already connected for you. I want them to learn about putting a basic human skeleton together. So they just get a bunch of bones on different sheets of paper, and can they connect a paper skeleton? See if they build them properly. Additional resources that come from other grades. I'm not going to go through these, but these are from other things that we've already done in other grades that would be related to kind of what you're doing as well, or to fill in the gaps and holes for some of the other pieces that you might do. So you may or may not need these depending on where the students are at. There's a lot in the First Nations in here to link the land and understanding again to animals, humans, the connections that we have with Mother Earth. So you'll find those videos in here as well. All right, and that should give you, I'm just going to get through these here really quickly.
How was our Mother Earth created?
Oh, sorry, I got that in there twice. So there we are, and we're 1 minute longer than we were yesterday. Our apologies. We're working on this, trying to get you into that 5 o'clock, but there's always so many resources that we try to throw in here and just give you so that you can walk away and at least hopefully have a good start, not feeling like you have nothing to begin with and no idea of where sort of what surface deepened transfer means, so that you can move forward with the concepts. I'm going to stop the recording, and if there are any questions at all, I'll just invite you to unmute yourself and just feel free to ask, or if you feel more